Hey, JK here. I want to thank you for sharing part of your day with me. Day 4 is here and we're traveling up to Seattle, Washington to talk about the Seattle Mariners. Every day after June 19th was a rainy day for them as they let a 10-game lead in the division slip and eventually lost out by 2 games since the Royals owned a tiebreaker not to go to the wild card. Very unfortunate. They did end up with an 85-77 record, again good for second in AL West, but that was not good enough for them. The pitching rotation for this team is absolutely phenomenal, but we're going to be talking about how the pitching rotation cannot carry the entire team as we talk about some of the disappointments. Now, before we get to the disappointments, let's talk about the people who actually did well. Obviously, we're going to be talking about Dylan Moore. He did not actually meet the threshold for at-bats, but he did lead the team in triples and stolen bases. Julio Rodriguez, the superstar, led the team in at-bats, runs, hits, doubles, batting average, and on-base percentage. Whereas, just as we mentioned in the very first episode, there are batters now who have right around the Mendoza line batting averages and still hit a whopping 20, 30 home runs, maybe even more, and have tons of RBIs. That's exactly what Cal Raleigh did, as he led the team in home runs, total bases, RBIs, slugging, on-base plus slugging, walks, and, surprisingly, strikeouts. Digging a little deeper in Cal Raleigh, he is the prototypical power defensive back as he only hit 220 but mashed 34 home runs and brought in 100 RBIs. The only thing worse than that is his backup catcher, Mitch Garver, who had a batting average of 172 and had more strikeouts than total bases. He had 133 strikeouts and 125 total bases. That's what we've come to, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we've come to. Speaking of where we are at this very time, Victor Robles is absolutely excited to talk about just that. He made his debut for the Washington Nationals in 2019, and statistically, that was his best year up until this year. After his rookie year, he could not replicate his numbers. It didn't help the COVID hit in 2020, but he had another 4 years to get back on track and just couldn't. In late May, the Washington Nationals did release him, and 5 days later, on June 1st, the Mariners picked him up. Robles debuted for the Mariners on June 5th and looked like a completely new man. From June 5th until September 29th, the end of the season, at least for the Mariners, he batted .328, scored 41 runs, and had 30 stolen bases, which is good for second on the team. Not too far behind Dylan Moore. This performance gave the Mariners confidence that he will continue this trend and not fade back into obscurity like he did in Washington. They gave him a 2-year extension with the hope that he will continue to be a leadoff man and have this carry over for at least the next 2 years to see if he can continue to get on base, steal bases, and score runs for this Mariners team, hopefully getting them into the playoffs and not having to settle for a wild card or coming down to the very last game of the season. Another guy that's had some success since moving from his original team is Luke Raley. Now, he's always been pretty sneaky good on the base pass and had a little bit of pop in his bat, but when he came over from the Tampa Bay Rays, before his former teammate and now current teammate Randy Arozarena, who I absolutely despise, Luke Raley was playing first and patrolling the outfield in right field, but he will end up taking over first base here in this 2025 season because of some moves on the roster. The Mariners saw his stats in 2023 with 19 home runs and 14 stolen bases, said we want that in our system, so he did come back and hit 22 home runs, only stole 11 bases, but did have career highs in hits, runs, RBIs, and 2 more hit by pitches, so he's finding ways to get on base. As much as I would love to keep talking about how good the Mariners are and how this young talent is going to help them get to the playoffs, we're not quite talking about the pitchers yet, so that can't be the case. There are so many holes in the second part of the lineup for the Mariners. There are so many disappointments when it comes to veterans. Not something I can confidently say, yes, these guys are going to take a leap forward after taking multiple steps and falling back even off a cliff. First guy we're going to talk about, J.P. Crawford. He had a phenomenal season a year or two ago with 90 plus walks. He fell off every statistical category to the career lows. Like, it's not even funny. It's sad. Because J.P. Crawford, great guy. I'm sure he's a great guy. I don't know him personally. And he's better than me when it comes to baseball, but hitting right at the Mendoza line and not being able to get home runs, barely getting RBIs, not walking, barely getting on base, not going to cut it, man. Someone else who was a huge disappointment in 2023, did better in 2024, but still not great, Josh Rojas. In 2024, he had more strikeouts, 108, than hits with only 95. He is not going to lead your team statistically, and with a sub 650 OPS, he's barely going to be able to get on base for you and give any type of run or stolen base support. Definitely not the guy from 2022 with the Diamondbacks. Moving across the diamond to another disappointment, Jorge Polanco cannot replicate the success he had in Minnesota because of injuries. He's going to be moving over to third to give Dylan Moore, a youngster, a shot at second. Speaking of Dylan Moore, he's a fast boy, but he barely hits above 200, and while he's better at baseball than I am, I'm not on a 3-year deal worth $8.8 million. I also do not strike out 123 times, which is more than the number of runs and hits he has combined in 2024. We touched on him earlier in this video, but now we're going to circle back to him. Randy Arozarena was having a terrible year with the Rays, hitting only .211 and was traded after 100 games to the Mariners. He did manage to hit 5 more home runs, steal 4 more bases, and hit .231, but he struck out at a 6% higher clip with the Mariners than he did with the Rays in 45 less games. That's both impressive and disappointing. The last disappointment we're going to talk about is Mitch Haniger. Spent a handful of seasons with the Mariners before going down south for 1 year with the Giants. Came back home, hit .208 with 12 home runs, and had almost as many walks as he did RBIs. Now, that would be great if he had a lot of RBIs, but he only had 44. So he had 40 walks. That's not impressive, and that's even less impressive because he had 126 strikeouts. Now that we're done talking about the disappointments for the Mariners, let's get to the pitching staff. This is arguably one of the best pitching staffs in the entire league, second only to the Braves, where they both finished with a 3.49 ERA. The Mariners had a slightly higher number after the 9, so technically the Braves got the nod by like 1,000th or 1,000,000th of a point. So you're really splitting hairs with these two rotations. They were both great in 2024, and I absolutely believe the Mariners will continue to be great for at least another 2 or 3 years. Now, all 5 starting pitchers for the Mariners, or at least the 5 pitchers who started the most games for the Mariners, had some things in common. First of all, they all had at least 10 quality starts. They also all had at least 9 wins, and all of them, with the exception of Brian Wu, who was on a innings restriction, had at least 171 strikeouts. All 5 of them also had an ERA 3.64 or below, with a WHIP of 1.17 or below. With the exception of Logan Gilbert, Brian Wu, and Bryce Miller, they had sub-1 WHIPs. That's pretty amazing when you think about it, and as good as this starting 5 is, the bullpen let them down. When they would hand the ball off to the bullpen, they were the second worst bullpen in the entire league, with only a 60% conversion rate of saves. There's not really much of anything else to say about this pitching rotation because they're all so good, and the relievers are not great. They also did not have Matt Brash last year, who was by far one of the better relief pitchers in the entire league 2 years ago, but did have to have offseason surgery and was not back in time and actually was shut down the entire year. I'm looking forward to getting him back on my fantasy teams, but then also just in general because he is a weapon. Otherwise, the Mariners didn't really do a whole lot in free agency either. They did bring in Rowdy Tellez, Neftali Feliz, Donovan Solano, and Shintaro Fujinami, all on minor league contracts. Rowdy Tellez does have some power. Donovan Solano can play all around the infield and probably some outfield. Neftali Feliz was the closer and partially an opener for the Rangers a few years ago, and Fujinami came in 2 years ago with the Orioles, so no real big splashes, and they didn't lose anyone, so I don't know if they actually got any better. I don't think they got worse. At the end of the day, the Mariners have to get better at closing games out. Their starting 5 can get them to at least the 6th or 7th inning, and then it just falls apart. Bullpen, definitely not where it needs to be. Andres Munoz only had 22 saves. Voth and Stanek only had 15 holds each. They are absolutely not going to be relied on to win games for the Mariners this upcoming year. Matt Brash is going to help, but one man can only do so much. I also do believe that with the generational talent of Julio Rodriguez, this has to feel a lot like being an Angels fan for the last 15 years, with Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani both on your team, and the most you can do is look back to 2002 and remember when you won the World Series. Now, as much of a heartbreaking and disappointing idea that is to end on, we're now going to be talking about the winners of the AL West, the cheating Houston Astros. Cannot stand them and hope they lose every single game next year. But we still have to talk about them because the Mariners pissed away the lead and actually allowed them to win. We're going to be back tomorrow, and against my better judgment, I will talk positively about the Astros and how they did decently well. This is J Cake. I still hate the Astros, and I want to thank you for sharing part of your day with me.